Hello, welcome back to a session with the Old Bandicoots. This time we are asking if brands should be neutral. The recent case of Budweiser, which released a can to mark an LGBTQI event, went badly for the brand even though it was a side activity. Their main customer base rebelled and the sales of the beer tanked for months. The company itself lost a lot of value. So the question we are asking is it possible in today's world for brands to be neutral? Is it really none of their business as to what the sexual preferences or the mentality or the thoughts? What's your take?
Think at the end of the day, whether it's Budweiser or any other brand, all these brands are in business, provide value and collect money in return. The older brands, especially the brands that are decades old, as we covered in an earlier episode, have certain challenges of their own, which the newer brands don't have. The newer brands come with built-in excitement. They come with a contextual reference of being today. They don't have to try hard to say that they are young, whereas older brands especially are constantly reaching out for causes of today. That is a clear example of probably a brand stretching itself too far to put itself in the social bracketing of, hey, I understand today's mores, I am as hip as they come. What probably a popular brand like that can forget is that as much as you try to espouse the cause of the LGBTQI community, it's easy to forget that the majority of the world is the non LGBTQI. And therefore, it is quite possible because these things are just evolving. We don't know how it's going to go. It seems like a fair thing to correct the injustices of the past, to bring inclusively other communities. All that is a social thing that society decides for itself. Until it settles down, probably in the next 20 years or so, or God knows what time it's going to take, a popular brand probably will be taking a huge risk if it were to already assume that the issues are settled and as though the whole world has already accepted it for a fact. The very response to Budweiser tells you there are huge groups who are not comfortable with these new abbreviations as yet. And while there may be taking, social stances, political stances on the subject, it's at a personal level, probably not many people are comfortable with this whole new world that is coming up. It's difficult to generalize. Honestly, we don't know. And which is why, as you indicated earlier, whether it is a brand's business at all to be getting into these social and political issues. If a commercial brand whose job is to make itself some money while selling products and providing value, is it its business at all to be getting into these kind of areas becomes a moot question. And perhaps the Budweiser case is a bit of a warning to most other yesteryear popular brands to say, hey, tread carefully. There are issues that are not yet settled even in society. Advertising does not create social mores. We only reflect or mirror what's out there. And that is also, you're making a judgment as a brand that it won't ruffle anybody.
The
Stand.
interesting bit, Narayan, from what you just said, is that it's a wonderful reflection of where society stands on a particular issue. So, for example, you might do a whole lot of focus group studies and then take research into various aspects and talk to, let's say, a cross section of people, which will tell you that, hey, there is no problem. But it's only when the campaign breaks, whether it's a social media influencer responds, reacts, and that particular thing takes off, is where this whole thing then suddenly becomes a very different ball game. I think it was also much harder for customers to kind of rally around an issue in the days before the internet. But today, you can take an issue and run with it and get a whole lot of attention in a very short while simply by ensuring that a well known name, that they attach themselves to a well known name, and then that goes, it sort of snowballs so rapidly that the brand is caught flat footed. For example, that food influencer who suddenly came in and spoke about Bonvita and then saying that it was completely irrelevant in terms of what their ingredients were and what the benefits were is not something that we could have predicted or looked at 20 years ago. And maybe customers wouldn't have bothered because it just took too much of work to get this surge of interest in what they were saying. So I think this comes from both ends. That is, one is that you are neutral because you're out there to do business, but you're also caught in the crossfire when you may not have been part of an issue at all, but then it suddenly gets flagged off, and then brands have no choice but to try and tamp things down or to address this in some way that ensures that their customer base is not affected.
Also, it's precisely what you said, that the power of the consumer, or what you may call the keyboard warriors, to get onto social media and to express their opinions en masse to sizable audience is
Yeah,
like unprecedented, and therefore
right.
brands can't even get away with stuff that they probably that they certainly got away with in an earlier time. Sometimes even unfairly a brand can be taken to the cleaners if a certain group with influence decides that that is not a good brand for whatever reason. Therefore, we are living in that world, which is why probably it was more of a legitimate risk that a brand like Budweiser took. See, the thing is, brands have to necessarily get into these areas. This comes with owning a brand, running a brand, managing a brand, especially the older brands, because the responsibility for you is, if you keep repeating, flogging a dead horse and repeating the same things that you've already said and all that, and saying, oh, Horlicks is for nutrition, Complan is for that, and Bata is for reliability, and if you keep saying the same thing, you will certainly become old school in no time, you'll become irrelevant in no time. It's a sin in advertising to be boring. And the other extreme is this sin of sensationalism.
Right.
Therefore, you can't be the boring guy and you can't be the loud guy making all kinds of stuff. So somehow you're expected to be exciting without being controversial,
Offending.
without offending, or
Yeah.
controversial without being somehow offending. Be
Yeah.
controversial, but don't be that controversial. Right now, I think it's probably fair to say, as a commentary on our social life, that everybody is belongs to some group or the other, and everybody gets easily offended like never before. There were 20 years ago, there were Sardarji jokes in casual parties and stuff like that, and enough people will tell you that their own Punjabi friends and Sardarji friends had the best jokes also, and
Yes.
the Tamilian jokes and the Mallu jokes and the Bengali jokes were told by the Tamils and the Mallus and the Bongs.
Right.
That's how it was.
Right.
Now, to say Mallu or a Bong itself is considered offensive by certain people. What do you mean? I mean, who do you think you are? So,
Yeah.
therefore, there is not a single subject today that is not, if not taboo, it's kind of getting touchy. We are all
Yeah.
becoming extremely touchy because I don't know what it is. I'm not a sociologist or anything like that, but I know enough to know which areas I can go into and which areas are telling me don't go there, kind of stuff. So, in the name of being interesting, in the name of touching people, in the name of being non boring, brands may be tempted to enter certain areas traditionally we could earlier on. Early 90s, that famous Milind Soman ad with his girlfriend of that
Yeah.
time,
Madhu
something.
Sapre.
I mean, it was a pretty bold ad. People might remember that it was
Right.
I mean, they were wearing nothing, and they were covered by a cobra or some such thing. And nobody even remembers the brand. It was something called Tufts Shoes. It certainly drew attention. It certainly drew
Yeah.
its share of controversy, and probably, but it was done with that in mind. And advertising will tend to skirt with that, because new brands, and I mean, let's say every brand doesn't need it. It's not the only way to approach a consumer. All that is fine, but it is a known trope. It's one of those techniques, if you want to call it for anything else, by which you can try. Now, today, you try posting two people naked
Yeah.
in
You'll
a wedding
instantly
state and
get
all that. You will
feedback.
probably scratch this up. I don't think anybody is going to look at that.
Yeah.
In fact, if you show this 90s ad to today's people or something, the only thing they may be surprised at, oh, they did that in the 90s? Wow, that's about the
Isn't it?
only surprise. Not the fact that that
Yeah.
is shocking or anything like that, with
Yeah.
all kinds
Yeah.
of stuff be that we are all having access to these days online. It's a pretty tame sort of an ad in retrospect. But so maybe the equivalent of that sensationalism today is probably to take up these kind of edgy causes. And therefore, you're thinking that if I associate myself and my brand with an edgy cause, I will be known as an edgy brand. And then people will forget me as a historical brand and treat me as today's brand. Now, that is the gamble that
That
backfired.
is a gamble. Now, Narayan, the interesting bit about what you just said in terms of getting attention, it is that there were causes that earlier people may not have responded to. But today you have another thing, which is interest and boredom. Like you talked of the creating a controversy. I'm now wondering if the so-called non-controversial aspects of human nature, which is kindness, for example, you have hundreds of posts on LinkedIn of people talking of how their Uber driver and conversations with them, it's taken to the level of ridiculousness
They
where
return
you
their
know that
purse and yeah.
yes, they try to do something where, so that I think is the other aspect. I can't just say I was kind. I can't just say that I paid another $100 to the guy. I have to give the guy's, family history and where he came from. And the more uneducated he was, or the smarter he seemed, there might be one line in that entire post which is relevant. But that is made into a 300-word post, and then there's a photograph of the man with his hand around the Uber driver, and this is what happened to me. And beyond a certain point, I think it gets ridiculous when you try and take something which was taken for granted earlier. But today, that's the curious thing, that the safe spaces that people can talk about, spaces now shrunk to the point where it's only the stand ups who can say whatever they want and get away with it. And they're going more and more extreme. It's as if you're willing to go into one space and laugh and then say, oh, that is only a stand up routine. It's not there as part of a conversation.
Yeah, my suspicion is it's probably damn difficult today to be a stand up comedian just for these reasons, because in the name of stand up you are even probably allowed only this much of leeway. Somehow people's fuses are getting lit faster, people's sensitivity to things are really on the rise,
Yeah,
and people's intolerance for any opposing opinion is I mean, this is the context we are living in. I'm saying, as
yeah.
advertising communication professionals, we have to pay heed to the context. Therefore, as always, there is this thing of, while this controversy, while quoting controversy, while trying to be sensational, while going against the grain, all those have always been valid ways of drawing attention to the brand. And if you wanted to go that way, then know that in today's world, you're going to be facing far more vitriolic reactions than ever before, not the least of which is because social media is in everybody's hands, and therefore, they are going to come after you in many ways. Now, you may say that's fine, at least everybody's talking about my brand. And that used to be the thing, like, they say that even bad exposure is better than no exposure.
There's
The
no
brand
such
is what.
thing as bad PR.
But I think brands learn a lesson and say that, listen, if I'm going to be quoting with controversy, somehow I have to quote it within these limits rather than limitlessly, seems to be the lesson out of this.
Also, one of the things that brands have to contend with, the dipping interest over time in a product category which is highly competitive. How do you stay within the contours of the brand image that you have created and still manage to leverage it for whatever it is worth? Because I think that is getting to be a difficult aspect to walk. So, for example, Zomato can come out with, create 40 posts a day and put it out on social media. And then one ad from that whole thing which offends someone is the one that will get flagged off and talked about. I can get people to talk about it because one way is to arouse interest, the other is to create a controversy that I can quickly diffuse. So if you make amends and then say, okay, then people get to hear of it even vaguely and might check it out. And I think as we're exploring brands which are getting into categories which are more intimate, or categories which are more in your face, then how do you essentially get across to consumers in that category without offending a large group of people? If I was to give you an example, there is something which is supposed to be a trimmer for testicles. There is no way that you can create normal so called advertising for something like that. Product category itself could be seen as controversial. In which case, how do you create neutral advertising for something that is seen as controversial to begin with?
See, you
I
can't.
think these
See, if the product category is to do with intimate stuff, then you can't hint. You'll have to talk bravely and upfront about it and use that partly as an entertaining way of doing it. I mean, there are ways of
Yes.
doing all these things crassly, and there are ways of doing it well too. Because I mean, at the end of the day, it is a part of the body, and it's just another thing. So, and probably the young people are not offended by the grammar and words, and as much as the older people, as much as the
Yeah.
Victorians were prudish about sex at large, as though
Right.
such a thing didn't exist at all. They
And
were born
children got
without knowledge,
mysteriously created. Yeah.
created or something. Yeah, therefore I
Yeah.
think every age has its little taboos, restrictions, certain things that it feels squeezy to talk about and all that. But as those barriers break down, it becomes nicer for newer products to come out and to talk about it by calling a spade, and there's nothing wrong with that. There you're not really trying to court controversy. There the product is itself sensational in a way, and the
Yeah.
advertising needs to just stay on course, and it'll be automatically sensational unless you do something unnecessarily crass or stupid. If you stay close to the product category, you're going to be reasonably successful in the communication of it. Whether people actually need a product like that is a separate issue in any case, but at least the communication, the advertising agency would have done its job by saying that, listen, you told me that is the product, and therefore, I am promoting that product, so now don't come in my way. And that's perfectly fine. The reason that we were talking about Budweiser was because Budweiser is not exactly an edgy category, which is why probably it was, like I said, in retrospect, an unwise
Right.
thing to go after edgy social causes.
Maybe that's the lesson, that stay as neutral as you can without getting too close to the edge. This is a business, it's not about causes. So I think there's a very clear difference between a cause and a business. And the moment you tend to mix the two, they're combustible. In today's world of the engaged customer, and that wonderful word, keyboard warriors, which is essentially where the cost of putting in a comment or the cost of rising up against a brand or a particular point of view has dipped tremendously over the past few years. So,
On the other hand, if you want to
yeah,
ignore all this and say that I am willing to take the risk, simply means it
yes.
may or may not succeed. Then don't be surprised that it didn't succeed because you took that risk. Then you're going with your eyes open. Society may hit back at me. Yeah, then in any case, please go ahead, because with high risk, if you win, you're going to win big. But if you lose, you're going to be losing big.
On that note, we will end it here. So, like, share, and if you believe that this is something that you should weigh in on, we'd be very happy to hear from you. Thank you, and see you around the
Bye
next
bye.
time.